Hi, good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to Beyond Compliance. Thanks for joining us here. My name is Aaron Bolshaw. I'm the VP of Marketing for Safety Chain and the moderator for today's presentation. Enabled remote possibilities, enabling for COVID Phase-2, remote possibilities. This is a big topic right now, especially as audits and returning to work are starting to open up, and this is certainly different across the country depending on where you're at. It's different country to country, it's different state to state here in North America, both Canada and the US. So we've got a very timely topic for you. For today, we have just very quickly about Beyond Compliance is a monthly industry update for food and beverage facility operators, quality assurance, safety and compliance professionals, and even executives are getting more and more into this, especially in light of what's going on in the scrutiny around food safety and food manufacturing. So we partner with thought leaders across different sectors, from labs to equipment manufacturers to consultants and many, many others. And really our goal with Beyond Compliance is to bring you insights around the market that shape the way we grow our businesses, deliver quality products to our customers, and even just baseline, just safeguarding our brand in some tough times. So Safety Chain is the sponsor of the series, and a little bit about us for those that aren't familiar. Safety Chain is the #1 plant management platform that improves yield, maximizes productivity, and ensures compliance for food and beverage manufacturers. Trusted by over 1,500 facilities, Safety Chain is the only complete solution for production. So think OEE and SPC, right? Food safety and quality, there's that QMS component, and also supplier compliance. So while we get into it, just want to make sure everyone understands it's informal, but this is an informational topic, so we want to keep this lively. No one can hear each other. We can't hear you. Everyone's on mute, but we do want to hear from you. If you have questions, use the console on your right and send us some questions. We'll be getting to those later in the presentation. Today we have about an hour planned for the presentation, and before we get into it, I did just want to make sure if anyone right now is having audio issues, it's a good idea to just kind of dial in. Sometimes there's some problems connecting with the computer through the webinar console. All right, with that, I'm very happy to introduce today's topic speaker. It's the CEO and co-founder of London Consulting Group out here in California. Daniel Campos is an expert. So he's got over 15 years of experience, really with all sides of industry and brands, but Fortune 500, family-owned businesses, you name it. He's got a great insight. And what we wanted to talk about today, Daniel, was this idea of kind of coming back into somewhat normal operations, knowing that things aren't going to be the same, though. So, Daniel, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here again. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, and we got.
Let me go ahead. Go ahead, Aaron. I'll jump right in. How about that? Thank you, and I'm happy to be here. Let me talk briefly about who we are, just for reference. Give you an idea of what we're exposed to. We started in '91 and operate in 26 countries now, almost 30 years old as a company. And we, in the US, we support companies primarily in the food and bev vertical. And we do that with projects that range, in scope from strategic planning and operations, marketing, sales. But we're really exposed to the big, broad list of processes that we support with. Today, however, we want to talk to you about the recent trends impacting operations now, updated for May, June, and then really focus on inspiring you of how to go back to the company and not just, what you're probably already working on, which is how do you keep your employees safe, how do you keep your clients safe and your product safe, but more than that, using the opportunity to kind of redo your company, take the operations to that next level, and really adapt to what's going on here. And so I'll talk about three important trends, and I'll start with this. How about what we're all going through? It's a disruption to our lives. It's a disruption to so much of what we're used to, and it's not something that is just a few days or a few weeks. We've all had 3 or 4 months to essentially get ready for that new phase of remote work. So the most recent changes around this is that the economy in the US is reopening. The economy in some other countries is reopening as well. Europe leading as well, China, Asia in general, Central and South America are still kind of going up that hill. But we're all gonna get to this point where jobs are restarting, and it's sectorial certainly, but the consensus is that it's not going to be a quick recovery. It'll have its ups and downs, and it'll be challenging for everyone. There's also the reality of the potential new waves or the continuation of current waves, and this is a recent snapshot of new cases, and you can see that certain states in the US are being hit. So the economic recovery, once again, is not going to be super quick. And the reality also is that remote work is not a fad. This whole thing that we're doing has been happening for a while. This is a survey for 2019 in which over 70% of respondents are working remotely or are in a hybrid environment where remote is a reality. So it's not just that the last 3 or 4 months have pushed us into this. This has been happening for a while, and also it's here to stay. This is the updated version of that initial survey for 2020, and even though we're all challenged by this forced work from home, reality is most folks are happy about it. So to kind of let that sink in, this is not going away. This is the reality that we're all going to face, and so we're thinking, how do we transition to a different normal? It's not a new normal; it's just different, where work from home is happening, customer behavior is changing because of the changes in the economy, and so kind of we need to adapt our model. How? Well, customers and consumers are changing, so they're adopting digital, and your brand needs to be accessible to them in this consumption mode. They are employees and as well, right? So they're working from home, eating out less. So can you change your setup to run efficiently with potentially lower volumes? But also it means that your employees are expecting you to change. So non-critical or old digital processes that can shift to this primarily work from home model, and a shift also in customer facing processes. So this all points to that reality where we all need, as business owners, as executives in our companies, we all need to embrace remote. And so today we want to inspire you by looking at it in 3 different ways. Now, these are processes that connect with one another. And so I'll go really quickly over them, and then show you how to think about putting it in motion in your company. First, this is something that perhaps you've heard about. It's this customer journey analysis. And so what this means is rethinking the ways you approach and interact with your customers. Second thing we'll talk about is how to enable remote supervision. This is remote work, but it's also boiling it down to the points of control that help your leaders still be engaged with the processes within your facility, maybe at a distance. And a few notes at the end of right sizing and retraining, just things for you to consider, because as you change your business model, as you change the way you approach your customers, you have to think about your staff and whether they're properly equipped to do that. All right, so let's start with customer mapping. So here, customer mapping is a very important process. It's nothing that's completely new. It's perhaps something that your company did when it started, or maybe there's an annual process to do this recurringly. But the point here is that you get close to your customer in the loyalty stage. And so what is the loyalty stage? We picked this very simple example because it's an idea of something that we all do, right? Like this e-commerce, and then in this particular example, it's about somebody buying shoes online, right? So it's a very simple, simple process. And you'll see that it has a number of layers here. So we'll go over each one of these to give you an idea of how you can apply it to your company. So this is the customer life cycle. And when we say loyalty, what we want you to think about is that customer that becomes aware of that potential that your product or brand has for their lives, and then they consider buying it, and they compare maybe pricing and features and packaging and all of that, then go through the actual process of acquiring it, getting to know it, and then maybe, if applicable, service the connection to the brand until they become loyal, so recurrent buying, and maybe recommending to their families and friends. So that is sort of the backdrop to the customer journey mapping. And what I'd like for you to think about is how that turns into specific steps. And once again, this is just a quick zoom in of what this map looks like for you to get an idea if you've never seen one of these. You want to split the stages, the life cycle stages, into steps, and then like, for instance, wants to buy new shoes, and then down below, think about which touch points you have, all of the potential touch points you've got with your customers. So here, for instance, wants to buy new shoes and clicks on an ad. Well, the individual touch points and the departments that are part of this, they produce ads, they do e-shops and blogs and whatnot, right? So here, what you're trying to do, I hope you can picture it in these simple examples, is you're focusing on the design of that experience. So more touch points or less touch points or different touch points. And we'll use one of these examples as we progress into the other phases of today's discussion, where you may decide to include touch points in your customer experience. And what this turns into for the food and bev audience really now is jumping into the e-commerce race if you haven't. And if you have an established brand, this is probably something you do. But if you've got a mixture of co-manufacturing and your own brands, for example, maybe you rely on your distributors, and perhaps we've certainly seen our customers explore that opportunity, which brings a whole other set of touch points, because now you have your own store, you've got a kind of customer service, so on and so forth. That's the spirit of this map, and kind of zooming back out. It's an experience that can take many different shapes. What I want you to think about today is it's something that you probably need to do, because your customers and consumers are shifting because of all this crisis. So step number one, right? So the outcome here is a redesigned customer experience, and take it as an opportunity to innovate, and also as a foundation to remote work planning, because as you explore all these activities that you run in the different departments that push onto touch points, you can think about ways to leverage the fact that your employees are also remote, or design activities, any new activity you have to be done remotely. We'll talk about another example here in just a sec. And that's sort of the first stage. Think about redesigning the customer journey. Now, perhaps this is sort of the meat and potatoes, as they say, of the presentation here, and it's about remote work. We're all being pushed in this direction. We're all in this world of food and bev processing, which is obviously hands-on. It's something that looks like this, and it's complex. It's very complex because it has so many different moving parts. The environmental records, all your SQF and prerequisite programs, and then certainly, yields and productivities and control points and statistical process controls and nonconformances and all of those other aspects of your production that are very complex. So how do you approach in a systematic way the process of turning this into a bit more remote? Well, we'll first ask you to think about remote operations as ways to provide resilience to your operation. What's going to happen over the next few months or maybe a couple of years? You're probably going to go through staffing changes. All the reasons that are in your mind apply, and then certainly high variance in volume, a lot of uncertainty here, plus everyone else is doing something similar to what I'm touching on today. So as these competitors enter your market, because perhaps they were food service focused and now they want to go retail, as some competitors do e-commerce because they want to increase the loyalty of their customers, et cetera, you have to do this somehow. Certainly, it's an opportunity to change or increase your drumbeat. So online tools lend themselves to data collection. So perhaps if you're doing something like, inspections of labeling or some other like manual process that goes on a log, being able to have that digitized provides real-time visibility, but it also allows you to interact with your team on-premise or remotely, but with data that's gathered a bit more richly. And very importantly, it's an opportunity as well to implement continuous improvement. Figuring that perhaps with our first example of the customer experience mapping, we could kind of take it a few steps forward. And once again, there are many different ways to do what I'm going to talk about right now. We thought that maybe we could use the same framework. Okay, so think about this as the customer experience journey that I just described, but for your plant. And so instead of the customer life cycle from that consideration process and then into life to being loyalty to your brand, in your facility, what we're talking about rather is these few steps, right? So the planning stage where you do some of the forecasting, capacity analysis, and maybe scheduling, and then onto production and selling and distribution, and then customer support. And so what we want you to think about is more or less along the same lines of what we just saw. What are the different individual activities that you perform to add value to your customers, to move that puck forward until you collect, and then hopefully, on top of this, there's that loyalty map that we just discussed. So for example, here you would prepare forecasts and do capacity analysis on the scheduling, procure materials, et cetera. Imagine going through that for your company. This is what enables some of the perspectives of process improvement, because you'll start to quickly recognize activities that perhaps you don't really want in your facility. Maybe they're not very efficient, maybe they're duplicate, but also you'll start to get an idea of activities that are no longer applicable in this revised reality. We want to encourage you to also think about processes that have multiple agents involved and to simplify them. So a simple process is easier to take remote, and also, a process that goes across many departments means potentially that you're processing data multiple times. So at this point, what you're looking at is potentials to identify redundant activities and to also add new activities. And so these new activities perhaps come from that analysis of your customer experience, where you go and maybe decide that you're going to do a bit more of e-commerce. And okay, so e-commerce means that people want to know what their order is doing, where is it? And maybe that's a new activity in your planning or make process. Maybe you'll eliminate manual reports, as I was saying, because an automated report is more efficient and can go across departments. Ultimately, what we want you to think about is breaking down these activities and identifying 3 different things. First one is, can we automate data collection in this one step? So build a flag, right? Put a pin in those activities where data can flow automatically from machines or from an existing data source that you're not leveraging, an ERP scan, for example. Can you enable remote work here, such that somebody can maybe come to the office but not necessarily have to move around the facility to gather data and make decisions? Or even better, can you have somebody not come to the office and still have access to that data? And finally, can you optimize operations here? So what this looks like is sort of a completed map here, where you perhaps identify activities that can be enriched from the perspective of the customer. Perhaps if you're going to do a new activity, such as an email order tracking, point to it right here. What you need to do before is an inline customer specification check. And because you're doing this perhaps in safety chain, you can take that information and build it into that email that says, yes, your order has been tracked. And by the way, here's evidence that we double checked your labeling requirements against your standard. It's such a maybe simple activity when you consider it from that first step where we looked at the map of customer experience and then build it into the operations. Adds tremendous value to your process and sets you apart from your competitors. So this is the kind of spirit we're looking for. Something else that you can think about is just optimizing operations. And we've got another example here where you do automated OEE. Safety Chain provides this functionality as well as many other platforms. The important thing is that you can do the data collection on its own and then distribute that data so that supervisors and production managers can monitor production real time. So maybe what that means is if you don't have maybe an ERP that recognizes job outputs, or maybe the fully automated way to do this, right, where the machine itself interacts with the job and recognizes output, there are certainly ways to have information flow almost real time, even if it's manually data collected, as long as it's collected on a device that parses it out and distributes the information. Now, something else that you could do is kind of expand your existing tools. We see a lot of processors that have the systems in place, but perhaps have not completed the rollout of certain modules. And so maybe if you've got a WMS process that you can augment by scanning order numbers and then matching them to CRM systems, that integration allows perhaps your customer service reps that are now working remotely to operate out of their own homes, and maybe because they're also enabled by a cloud-based call center that lets you your customer service reps have the entire version of the truth at their fingertips and provide that differentiated customer experience to your customers. So similar to the example of customer experience, this is a way for you to systematically dissect your operations, match them to your customer experience, and think and incorporate elements to set you apart, to be more efficient, and to enable this remote work as you consider every separate activity. One last thing I'll say about this is that you can really go out and think about the maybe low-hanging fruits like OEE. That's very important. Like CFOs are probably looking daily at cash flow and sales and whatnot, and so OEE provides that additional layer that's important to do. But also you should think about that long tail. So what is the long tail of data collection? The long tail of data collection is something that will really enrich your capabilities, but that is much less evident. So for example, that labeling check, some of the traceability inspections, some of the pre-op inspections that are so key to a good efficient run, and that 99% of the time we go to facilities and all of these little data points, allergen control, and maybe something to do with how many people are on the line, et cetera, they are collected manually. They are part of a traveling sheet somehow, and they never leave paper. So this is what really takes management time from your staff. OEE is important. You should put it in place if you don't have it. But these small data points that your staff is devoted to collecting because it's part of the hazard plan or part of the prerequisites, that is where you'll find gold in mapping your processes. Okay.
Yeah, and Daniel, I'd love to step in and
think about here is that you can go back and into your supply chain. As we were preparing this presentation, we were reflecting on ways that safety chain customers are using the tool, and maybe in the spirit of remote work are extending access with specific forms for suppliers. So now what you're doing is you're enabling remote work from your QA staff that perhaps used to go and audit suppliers somehow in person, and now you're using a tool you already have for a new purpose. Right? So now that supplier can provide 90% of the information you audit digitally, and that QA person that has that responsibility can do it from home. So kind of thinking out of the box, right? And this is what we mean by the long tail of those activities that you should think about that are not headline, automated data collection use cases, but that are so important to our industry. And so here, what we want you to encourage to do then is certainly new ideas, but really shoot for the stars. This is a wonderful opportunity for your business to extend out of your existing comfort zone, your frame of work, and go all out. Do something different. It's the reality of what we're living through. It's the unprecedented change in the consumers and behavior in the economy, and we see amazing opportunities for those companies that embrace change and kind of choose that remote mindset, that ability to be agile. Think about this as something that's easy to do, easier than ever, and really just imagine ways that maybe you want to see on a sci-fi movie. Perhaps those are at your reach now. Okay? And so that's one way to look at remote work. Remote supervision is kind of the tip of the iceberg here that you want to see immediately, but it really is just moving that company into a new way of working. Last thing you can't consider in this process is right sizing and retraining. And so some of the low-hanging fruits, similar to kind of like that idea of OE or automated data collection, are adjusting schedules, reviewing roles and responsibilities, and maybe training with a purpose. But let's talk about this real quick, and we'll start by saying this. Your employees are your most valuable resources. You put a ton of money into training them, into welcoming them into your facility, making sure that they think like you do, that they're passionate about your customers as much as you are. But for them, this is an unprecedented time. There's all this change in consumer and economy, and they also see amazing opportunities if they are willing to embrace change, because they know that technology and processes are more accessible than ever. And for those of you that have a keen eye, these are the exact same reasons that I gave for your company to do this from 2 slides ago. So really, this is a moment to think about this in parallel. It's an opportunity to work as a team with your employees, because they're already doing this. Remember, they've had a long time at home to consider how they're going to change their patterns as consumers. They've had a long time to think about how they want to work going forward. And I tie this a little bit, and just a little bit really, with this whole discussion of how new generations think differently than some of us that grew up in the 70s and the 80s. And this is where it really shows. They see opportunities to work remotely. They see opportunities to have more meaningful personal relationships. They see an opportunity to still be in the professional field. And also they see a lot of financial opportunities and savings from, gas and maybe, uniforms or some other direct or indirect costs related to the traditional way the work has been approached. So because they've had all of these few months to try technologies and processes, this is something that you need to address, right? So, and what do we want you to focus on? We want you to focus on cultural challenges first, okay? So you'll have people that have to be at your facility for sure. Your workers, line workers that touch the product, that care for it. You want them to be super engaged as always. But also you'll have potentially this group of folks that are working remotely today and may no longer come to the office, especially if you go through these few steps and you end up with what we want you to do, just shooting for the stars and all these new processes that can be performed remotely. So now you've got 2 different groups of folks that potentially have cultural differences. So you have to think about this first. That's the first area of focus. How is that going to affect your relationship with these 2 groups? For example, if you've got team members that used to have this kind of weekly gathering to go over results and whatnot, how to do that with on-prem and remote workers, as an example. One more example I'll give you, this is very important perhaps, is if you are addressing customers differently because you've gone through the process of that customer experience mapping, and now you've got new ways to think about customers because you're thinking about your brand first, or maybe going into these new channels of e-commerce, etc. You have to bring everyone along, right? Make sure that you do that. Reimagine your management process. We spoke about drumbeats before. And so what this means is those weekly meetings, because you've got more data, because the data is more real time, rethink the way you operate your business. That means that instead of that monthly meeting, you can have weeklies or sprints, or you can do a daily indicator or metric email, or you can change responsibilities so that perhaps one individual that had split oversight over a few things can now focus over a bit more or a bit less because the data is more accurate. And also consider compensation models. If you're moving from your old cheese, so to speak, to this new cheese, think about moving compensation with it so that all the new metrics can drive that compensation. And the reality is, unfortunately, the economy is going to be uncertain. It may affect you directly and your staff, and we're all going to go through it. So be forthcoming, be very open to your employees about your need to right size if you have it, and also consider flexible staffing models. And so what we have to say about this, and some of you already are doing this for sure, but this ability to work remotely also means that you have potentially the ability to keep some of those employees that on a traditional model, maybe it was 100% full-time employment with that office there and the computer and all the overhead costs. And now, if you rethink your customer journey in the first step, if you rethink your processes and find ways to implement that remote supervision into your processes, you may well be saving people's jobs because that enables that flexibility, and it's going to mean a lot for your employees. Okay, so that's the material I have today. It's keep in mind this is what we want you to think about and be inspired to do. Redesign the customer journey. Really think about those customers. Go for the stars in enabling remote supervision, those remote processes, and all that goes with it, with the long tail and the efficiencies, and really thinking about your employees as those consumers that are also changing, that are being part of that trend of remote work that isn't new, and that provide an opportunity for you to kind of redo your business model and come out of this crisis the end of the year, sometime next year, stronger, closer to your customers and consumers, and really with more engaged labor force in a more modern company. So that's the material I have for you today. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this information is of use to you.
Yeah, this has been great, Daniel. Thank you. I wanted to interject too. We've got a few more minutes, so if you have some more questions, we see some coming through now. We'll get to those in just a minute. But yeah, and some of them just have to do with some of the basic building block steps, like how do we start this data automation path? How do we do these things? And I really appreciate, Daniel, your approach to this, that framework where you say, hey, if you've got a customer journey, how can you sort of mimic that to do your own product journey? So that was really interesting. Tell you what, though, some people with this remote work, they were sort of forced into it almost immediately. The one case study that comes to mind, Daniel, is really auditing your suppliers, right? Now more than ever was a really important time to get in touch very quickly with your suppliers to make sure that they were following some safety protocols for COVID. So we had, Safety Chain had some great examples of this, but I wanted to highlight one in particular about a very well-known national direct-to-home provider of frozen food. They've got Daniel, I think they got about 600 suppliers, okay? So if you can imagine trying to wrangle 600 suppliers and also being able to keep track of where everyone's at in some of the questions and some of the acknowledgments that they had to send out to them to make sure, hey, are you testing your people for Corona? What are your protocols? Are we safe here? They needed to understand and identify risk within that supply chain. And I tell you what, this company, they knocked it out of the park. COVID had been wreaking havoc on their workforce. They had almost an instantaneous need for knowing where all their suppliers were as far as risk-wise. And so they were able to very quickly understand using safety chain in a remote fashion. They weren't able to go to those facilities, right? They weren't able to go and say, hey, I'm going to inspect what you've got going on. Using safety chain, they were able to do that remotely. And the director of food safety quality and the compliance side got extreme visibility up and down the executive chain. The CEO actually ended up calling him and saying, I had no idea we could see this. The CEO was seeing the performance of those suppliers on his smartphone. Okay, that's the visibility, that's the comfort and confidence that you want to be able to give, not just to your customers downstream, but just everybody internally. So some people just had to get forced into some of these remote operations very quickly, and we saw a lot of heroes kind of come out of that. Really fun stories too. This is a hard time. It still continues to be, Daniel, to work in food, and so any leg up that we can give our customers, either through the Bright Consulting that London Consultant Group has, or even just the software side, we feel honored to do that. So yeah, we've got a few minutes here, so I wanted to get to a couple of the questions that we have. The first one, and this goes back, Daniel, to sort of one of the slides that you had where you were talking about, hey, what are some of the first steps? And Jordan asks, what's a good way to start the data automation process, how to start doing that? And I'd love to give you just the floor a minute to give a couple more recap points on that.
Absolutely. This being a framework, it's a conceptual approach. So some of the pointers that I gave out are really the way to start. So in two ways. One is that low-hanging fruit of best practices that if you have not devoted time to implement, you should. OEE is sort of the basic there, yield analysis. If you're not automating the data collection there, then your numbers are probably skewed and your decision making is as well. It's very difficult to get some of those low-hanging fruit numbers right if you're relying on manual collection. There are approximations at best. So certainly start there. But also, from the quality perspective, if you wanted to start in a department, it's not very hard. If you've got a good food safety system in place, it's not very hard to go over your documentation index and identify all the manual forms that you've implemented as part of that system. And so if you quickly go down that list, I'm sure you can identify the first 3 or 4 that drive results, that produce or avoid non-conformances. So start with those. Just very quickly fire up a new form on safety chain, for example, and hand out some cheap tablets. Very quickly train your staff, because it really is something that they're already doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to add to that just a quick note that, and it goes to the culture shift about this data automation. First of all, if you're seeing paper in your plants anywhere, make that public enemy number 1. Go after that paper quickly, because there's a lot of insights that are just being captured on, in binders and in filing cabinets that really just, it's worthless unless because think of all the manual labor. You got to go find it, and then you got to put it into a spreadsheet, and then you've got to be able to, that's just a waste of time. Make paper public enemy number 1. And then the second part there is plan for success. Like, look at your business not as just thriving right now. And I think, Daniel, we may be a little, we're not getting your audio right now, so we might be having a little bit of technical issue. If I'm talking over you, I apologize. Okay, cool. Well, so plan for success though. Look long term. You're talking about the long tail data. I want you to think about how your business is thriving in 3 years, not just right now, not just at the end of 2020. This may include some e-commerce. We've got customers that have been able to switch on a really cool brand. They've done some neat stuff. They've got a barbecue sauce that you know, they opened up a shop online. Now, this may scare some people, but think about that. That's talking about back to what you're saying about the consumers. They've changed. I've changed. I know I go to the grocery store much differently now than before. I don't drive to work and grab that coffee or grab that snack. These things don't happen. So where am I purchasing things, right? We want those people there, but plan for success. And what that means is as you succeed, your operations are going to grow. So get the technology, get the solutions for data automation that will help you plug into machines down the road, even if you are doing, like you said, the tablets, right, Daniel? So, and I think that's a perfect first example.
Yeah. And maybe as we talk about e-commerce, and a good example comes to mind as well of a company that had e-commerce already, but it was a small piece of the business. You know, it was something that they started as an experiment. With the change in March, they saw their e-commerce grow, you know, tenfold, and all of a sudden it's a new area to look after for productivity, yield, et cetera, et cetera. So we fully expect them to come out. Certainly, e-commerce is their volume is going down as they sort of reopen their standard channels, but it's something that they now find is a strength and they can leverage on. So that's exactly right. I mean, where is the future of your company in 2 or 3 years? And chip away at that work. It's the right moment to do it.
Yep. Very good. Another question here, and it was one of the first ones that came in from James. He said it was in the e-commerce section. Is there any data that you can provide that supports that there's an increase in e-commerce right now versus retail sales? We didn't add anything, Daniel. I can talk very high level to that, but I'd love for you to add any wisdom that you have. We have been watching this closely. And it's some of the bigger outlets, right? You look at the Walmarts and the Targets, and you kind of say, okay, what's going on in their backyard? But you know, while we do see a huge, drastic increase in just overall e-commerce, online sales, it hasn't fully made up for all of the retail side yet, right? However, this big spike in online consumerism, it is expected to have a long-term effect in the way that we, as consumers, buy things and consume them. Daniel, do you have any other thoughts about, you know, how e-commerce right now is sort of pushing the food and beverage industry?
Yeah, I do a little bit, but maybe a bit early to say. The customers that we've surveyed have all indicated a spike right after shelter-at-home orders came in. Let's say 30 to 40% on average. They've all settled at around 70 or 80%, weirdly. And it goes across product categories. So even though supermarkets are doing very well, it must be concentrated in certain categories. And at least our customer base have all seen that diminished volume, perhaps except dairy. But I will say that we fully expect, because of the consumer behavior change, we fully expect e-commerce to continue to grow. And some of the statistics we've seen, you know, point to something like change of 3 months, perhaps being the equivalent to the expected change in 2 or 3 years in terms of e-commerce adoption and customer use, kind of recurring users on online and e-commerce platforms. So, you know, some of them are going away as they move out, but I fully expect e-commerce to be an ever more important part of doing business. Yeah.
Very good. And then we just have one last question here. And this is, Daniel, this is a bit of a fear-based question. And I got to say, I understand it. I see where this is coming from. We are continually being pushed into a headline-driven world, right? Where media stories or even your social media feeds are sending this one signal. And so one of the signals we're seeing right now is, hey, what's going on as we start to reopen? will there be another sort of bump or spike in these outbreaks? Are we opening too early? This is not what this person is saying, but the question is basically how do you, and it's an opinion-based question, Daniel, so just whatever you can offer would be great. How do we expect a possible second peak in COVID-19 to affect food and beverage facilities and operations going through the summer?
It's a great question. There's no right answer, but I will say that clients that are focusing on processes that are similar to what we've described today are probably better prepared for that uncertain future than some of the processes that we've seen that are trying to stick to their guns and kind of weathering the storm and hoping that we'll be back to where we were in February. If I'm going to choose between those two strategies, I will go full time with iterating every week, almost. It's like, because really it's so uncertain that you have to. Don't stay where you are thinking that it's going to come back to what it used to be. It never has, and it certainly won't now. If anything, it's going to change. So prepare your company to be resilient, to be able to pivot super fast. And I think that's the best insurance policy you can buy. Just be very resilient, very flexible.
Yep. I would add just one thing, and then we can wrap this up. I tell you, we as Safety Chain, we're a growing business as well, and I think that we didn't know what to expect, Daniel. We really didn't. We thought, oh man, food facilities we know that they're an essential part of the economy, and so we felt confident in the longer term spectrum. But we really thought people would stop answering their phones, and I got to tell you, Daniel, it's been the exact opposite. My recommendation is to look at these as opportunities right now to gain the efficiencies, to go after data automation. This is the right time to introduce these concepts. If you don't have this yet, to management, to executives, put an ROI case together, put a business case together, because these are the things now, automating the data, making your lines a lot simpler to run. Understanding OEE is very important. People kind of say, well, why should we do that now? Now is a great time because you have the attention of management. So, and we're definitely seeing that in our customers and our clients. So, don't think, I guess, to wrap that up, don't think that now isn't a good time, because it is. So with that, I'm going to wrap us up. Daniel, really appreciate you taking some time with us today. Very helpful. I love, as a marketer, of course, I'm a big nerd about customer journeys and life cycles, but I love how you put that into sort of the production zone. I never thought of that in quite that fashion before. Of course, we've got lots of other resources online, safetychain.com. Definitely go to London Consulting Group as well. They also have a plethora of resources. So, and we'll be back next month again with Beyond Compliance, and next week with FSMA Friday. So, from all of us here at Safety Chain, appreciate everyone's time today. Everyone will get access to the slides and the video and all the recording of this shortly following the presentation. Daniel, thanks again.
Happy to be here. Thank you all.
All right, that ends it for us today. Cheers, everyone.